Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Far Above Rubies today. I'm so very glad that each of you are here. Today, as we continue our walk and wrap up our walk through the book of Romans, we are talking about Romans chapter 14, verses 14 through 23. Tomorrow, on June 1st, we will wrap up chapters 15 and 16 all together at once in a tidy little package, okay? Today, Romans 14, verses 14 through 23, and we're talking about the thought between you and God. Now, this is a passage you've probably heard if you've been around the Christian life for any length of time. Let's dig into it together. Verse 21, 22, and 23 say this: "It is better to not eat meat or drink wine or do anything else if it might cause another believer to stumble." If you look up the root word there, it also means weakened. Other translations use the word weakened. Verse 22, "You may believe there is nothing wrong with what you are doing, but keep it between yourself and God. Blessed are those who don't feel guilty for doing something they have decided is right. But if you have doubts about whether or not you should eat something, you are sinning if you go ahead and do it. For you are not following your convictions. If you do anything you believe is not right, you are sinning." Okay, so let's break down this passage here, okay? Paul teaches so often throughout all of his writings that we should mind our own business, that we should not tell other believers how to live out their Christian walk, how to follow Jesus in their day to day, okay? So let's set this scripture straight, that this scripture is not a license to meddle in someone else's Christian walk. This scripture is not a license to say, well, Paul said if it causes someone to stumble, you shouldn't do it. Because that's not what it says. All right? This scripture is not a license to get in someone else's business and try to dictate how they live out their Christian walk. He does not say if another believer does something you believe is wrong, if another believer does something you don't like, if another believer does something you personally would not do or are convicted about, that you can make them stop doing it. In fact, Paul is not addressing the one who might stumble or the offended party at all in this passage. Okay, did you catch that? Paul is not addressing the offended party at all in this passage. He's telling us, okay, he's telling the person who might be doing the thing, all right, that if what we're doing, even though we believe something is not a sin, but it could genuinely cause another believer to become weakened in their faith or make them stumble in their faith, okay? Not cause them to get their knickers in a twist, not cause them to run to the pastor and try to tattletale, not be offended in a surface, shallow way. If what we're doing could cause someone to be weakened in their faith, there's a very strong distinction in those things that I want us to catch and wrap our minds around today, okay? If it could cause another believer to be weakened in their faith, which is a very serious thing, then we should keep that thing between us and God, all right? He does not say stop doing it. He doesn't say, and this is again something that Christians use to throw at one another, if it causes someone to stumble, you should stop doing it altogether. No, that's not what Paul said. He said you should keep it between you and God. If there's no proof in the scriptures that it's wrong, that it is sinful, and you do not believe it is sinful, then you should keep that thing between you and God if that thing could cause another believer to be weakened or stumble in their faith, all right? He also said, blessed are you for not feeling guilty about doing it. This is not about go do something in secret and feel ashamed even though there's nothing wrong with it because other people might be offended about it, all right? Let's tear down some of these myths and notions attached to this passage of scripture, all right? Paul said very plainly, if you're doing something that could genuinely weaken another person's faith, go do it between you and God and don't feel guilty about it, all right? He then goes on to tell us, for those who might be concerned, he says, if you have doubts about whether or not you should be doing that thing, If you're like, I'm not sure if it's right, I'm not sure if it's wrong, then the best thing for you to do is to not do it, okay? When he said, go do it between you and God, he said, if you've decided it's right, if you're sure, if you're certain, there's nothing wrong with this, it does not go against the scripture, all right? Then he says, if you're not even sure, if there's a hesitation, if there's a doubt, if there's, I'm not sure if it's right or wrong in your heart, refrain from doing it. Not because of other people, but because you want your heart to be right with God, all right? He says, he goes on to say, if you are going to do something that is against your own conviction, if you say, yeah, I feel a check in my spirit about that, but it can't really be that bad, and then you go on and do it, that's sinning. Not because the thing is necessarily sinful, but because you believe that it is against the heart and the nature and the character of God, and you do it anyway. All right? So I hope that today's devotional shed some light on this passage. Okay? I've personally heard people, I've personally been told by people that thing that's not sin could cause someone to stumble, and so you should stop doing it and never do it again. All right? But that's not at all what Paul said. So let's not twist scripture. Let's not contort scripture. Let's not try to take scripture and take our mallet and pound it into the little box that makes us happy until it looks nothing like scripture. All right? If you are doing something, the non-offended parties who Paul is speaking to, if you are doing something that you think could genuinely cause another believer to be weakened in their faith, that could allow for the enemy to creep in and destroy them, that could allow for the enemy to have a foothold in their life, then you should take that thing and go do it between you and God. Don't shout it from the rooftops. Don't put it all over Facebook. All right? If you're certain there's nothing wrong with it and it's not sinful, don't feel guilty about it, he says. Just don't advertise it. Don't put it in somebody else's face that could cause them to lose out in their faith. All right? He says, but if you feel like, I'm not sure, I think there might be something wrong, I feel something in my spirit when I go to do that thing, when I'm around that thing, I feel a check in my spirit, I think about it later when I go to sleep and I'm not sure if it's right, don't do it. Just guard your heart. Guard yourself and say, Lord, I don't know if that's sin, but I think it might be. And if it even looks like sin, if it thinks like sin, if it talks like sin, if it acts like sin, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, I don't want anything to do with it, God, because I want to make sure I stay so far away from sin that it can't grab a hold of my life. Okay? So, stop using that scripture to beat people over the head with. Know what you're saying. Know what you're talking about. Get some context. Shed light on it. And stop pretending to be offended because you don't like what somebody else does. Stop trying to be offended because you don't like what someone else does. Paul repetitively tells us to mind our own walk with God. And that is such good advice. We are not anybody else's master. We just talked about that a couple of days ago. We're not anybody else's judge. We have been shown so much grace. Let them and God work out their salvation. Let them and God work out their rights and wrongs, okay? It's not for us to tend to. It's not for us to put our fingers on. And it's certainly not for us to put our mouths on with our words and hurt somebody else, okay? I'm going to read that passage again so we leave that in our hearts today. It is better for you to not eat meat or drink wine or do anything else if it might cause another believer to stumble or be weakened. You might believe there is nothing wrong with you or with what you are doing, but keep it between yourself and God, all right? Blessed are those who don't feel guilty for doing something they have decided is right. But if you have doubts about whether or not you should eat something, you are sinning if you go ahead and do it, for you are not following your convictions. If you do anything you believe is not right, you are sinning. All right, let's refrain from putting things in people's faces that might really truly hurt their walk with the Lord. Let's keep things between us and God. Let's not feel guilt over doing things that are not wrong. And let's make sure that we're following our convictions. Let's make sure that we're not beating people over the head with scripture. That's not what it was written for. go and read Romans chapter 14, verses 14 through 23. And if no one has told you lately, you are loved and you are cherished and you are valuable. You have beautiful and tremendous worth, my sweet friend, and that worth is far above rubies. Thank you so much for being with us through this month. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We're going to wrap up quickly chapters 15 and 16 in the book of Romans, and then we're diving into the incredible book of 1 Corinthians together, okay? I will see you all again tomorrow. God bless you.